With every story, the question for a reporter is the same: what to put in and what to leave out. And those can be among the toughest decisions you have to make. The Investigators starts now.
Insurance companies are refusing to pay out on arson claims when the fire was started as an act of domestic violence.
Everything knows fire, ear, this side, lips, everything.
There was so much about her doing this interview with us that was really brave.
All week we've been turning the spotlight on syndicated mortgages.
Painted very rosy pictures with 12% interest.
First investor who contacted me, his family invested more than $700,000. They haven't seen a penny of that back.
I'm Diana Swain. We're the Investigators. This is what we do. At its heart, investigative journalism is about giving voice to people who might not otherwise be heard. This week, we're looking at two examples of that, beginning with our investigation into the way some insurance companies have been handling claims involving domestic violence. We first told you about Terry Lynn Robison's ordeal a few weeks ago.
And I was actually over here, and I was packing his clothes here, and he lit the bed on fire there, and it is very lucky that I got out.
Robison's husband set fire to their house last year after she asked him for a divorce. He was convicted of arson, but Robison's insurance company, Allstate, denied her claim, citing a clause that nullifies an insurance policy if anyone named on it intentionally sets the fire, even in a case of domestic violence. Several provinces have passed laws forcing insurance companies to pay in cases like these. Ontario isn't one of them.
How many times can I lose everything? Lost it once, lost it twice a few days later when they denied my claim.
When we took her story to Allstate, the company told producer Rachel Houlihan and me it would review its policies in cases like these. We've since learned Robison isn't alone.
And he have, light and fire coming. That's why I said, honey, what do you do? He yelling me, yes?
Wendy Sochek's husband, suffering mental illness, set their house on fire in 2010 when he doused her with gasoline. She spent 9 weeks in a coma and she's undergone 30 surgeries. But Allstate refused to pay for the damage to her home, citing the same exclusion clause. And in fact, was battling her in court while we were covering Robison's story. So let's start there, which was us believing there was this one circumstance. We knew there were others. You had come across them, but it was virtually the next day we learned about Wendy.
Yeah, it was a huge shock. we got this email from the lawyer saying, I couldn't believe it when I saw your story because I have a very similar case and I'm fighting it in court right now. And it was shocking.
So, in this past week, we've been telling people Wendy's story, and the story that we put on the National was 2 minutes, 37 seconds. As you and I know, it's right down to the second. There's so much you can't put in. You're focused on the facts of the story, but sometimes at the cost of the heart of the story, which is what you feel when you sit in their kitchen.
Yes, and I think with both these cases, I think we felt a huge amount of empathy for these women, and we were really concerned about making sure that we were respectful in our treatment of their stories, and making sure, though, that we struck a balance with making sure that the audience knew that these were real women who were undergoing incredible, monumental amounts of stress and heartache and financial hardship.
So part of what we're going to do today is something a little bit different, which is to show you more of the conversation that Rachel and I had. We were in Wendy's kitchen for over an hour.
Easily.
Hearing her personal story, not all of which we were able to share. So here's a chance to hear some of that. When you tell me about what happened, can you still see it in your mind?
I see what is, what that. Sometime, I said, why he do it for me? All the time what he coming, for the work, hi honey, hi can, kiss, everything. I wanted help. I going to family doctor. Only problem, what is going to for the help, another one specialist. He have to wait a long time.
Are these hard for you to look at now?
It's very hard, because, I so love him. Why he do like for me? What I do for him? 32 years. When my friend surprise everybody what he do. He's very good, Everybody shocked. He screwed my life. I know, what he said, to before, after accident, he called, he said, oh, you very good wife, you very good mother, you very good grandmother for the grandchildren. I asked, why you do for me? He said, I don't know, I never understand why. 9 weeks, maybe 9 weeks. That's why doctor told to my kids, he said, it's very bad, I hope if I be see for the eyes, because, all eyes, everything knows, fire, ear, this side.
Your lips?
Lips, everything. He put, here, and I lucky God, he give me second life.
What was your feeling when you learned that the insurance company wasn't going to pay?
7 years I paid insurance for the house. From what? If I never have very good friends, very good people who open my heart when is cry, when is coming here, I be never stay here. I be never stay here.
You've had very good people help you.
Very good people, for the, everybody, even people never know me and coming help.
But the insurance company?
Insurance company no interesting. No interesting, only coming open, door, making picture, lots of water and the floor, lots of damage. Nobody care.
They don't care about you?
No. If it be care about me, probably be ready be paid.
It's still moving.
Yeah.
I mean, we were sitting there as this woman was trying to understand her husband's onset of mental illness, still trying to understand if someone that she'd cared about, who cared about her, could do this.
There was so much about her doing this interview with us that was really brave. She really, really struggled to do this interview. Like, when we arrived at the house, as soon as she saw me at the door, she started crying because she was so nervous, and there was so much emotion that was still so raw for her.
And sometimes we encounter someone in their home like this who's being so honest, raw. Mm-hmm. You kind of find yourself praying that you do justice to the story, that there will be a reaction. Sometimes there isn't, but in this case it was almost immediate.
Yeah, I think you and I are both quite pleasantly surprised and pleasantly shocked that MPP Mike Cole is presenting or has presented a private member's bill, which will effectively say to the insurance companies, you can't do this anymore. When somebody's an innocent victim of a crime like this, you can't deny a payout. So the support for that politically seems like it's very positive and like it may actually happen.
Right, and what was interesting too is both of the women that we had met in our stories were with MPP Mike Cole on Wednesday in Ontario, in Queen's Park, when he announced that he was going to introduce this private members bill.
Yep.
Here's a bit of Terry Lynn talking.
The only reason that I'm even in public saying things and doing things is so that it doesn't happen again. This bill, this law, this needs to go through. So other women don't feel so alone.
And it's always, I think interesting for me to be able to say to people, these are not politicians. These are not people who are in front of a camera, as I am all the time, where it's comfortable. This is really hard.
Oh, this was so hard for both of them. At one point, MPP Cole put his hand on Wendy's because she was struggling so much to get through the press conference. Terry Lynn, I mean, same thing. She didn't want to tell anyone her story, but she felt like it was just something that she had to do. And they were invited up to Premier Wynn's office, and they were invited to sit down, and she spent quite a bit of time talking with them, listening to their stories, and has said that this bill, this law, has her full support.
And of course, that's just Ontario, and we've been talking really about Allstate because it happened to be the insurer in the case of both women, and Allstate has responded to this. They've said that they're going to be reviewing their practices, but beyond that, they said that these two stories have shown, here it says it's recently come to light that this exclusion has had unintended consequences, specifically to victims of domestic violence. We know that they are revisiting Terry Lynn's case and that they have offered a settlement to Wendy. We don't know the terms.
But the question is, this is just one insurance company,
right.
And even if Ontario passes this law, we're just another province. That still leaves the entire east coast of Canada and the north that don't have laws in place to prevent this from happening to someone else.
Thanks for this.
Everything sounds so secure and so safe.
We're also digging into an investment that left these people and many others out millions of dollars. Why they were so reluctant to share their story.
There's a sense of shame if something bad happens.
I'll speak with the reporter who broke the story. Plus, who paid for Donald Trump's inauguration celebrations? One of 5 things we learned from investigative journalism this week. That's next. Here are 5 things we learned this week from investigative journalists. CBC News reported a spike in mail scam complaints after hearing from a Montreal woman who discovered her mail was being forwarded to another address without her authorization. Officials in the state of Oregon concealed thousands of cases of elder abuse by not making them accessible on a website that tracks the performance of care facilities for seniors. That's according to an investigation by the Oregonian newspaper. The state says the website will be replaced. Several former Canadian soldiers say they suffered abuse at the hands of the military during training exercises back in the 1980s and 90s. They spoke to CBC's Go Public after it reported allegations by 2 other former soldiers who say they were tortured during an exercise at a military base in 1984. A Huffington Post reporter investigated donations to the organization that planned Donald Trump's inauguration by asking her Twitter followers to examine its public filings. The crowdsourcing campaign found hundreds of cases where Trump's inauguration committee credited donations to the wrong person. The committee acknowledges it made mistakes. And CBC News reported more than 120 Chinese Canadians have likely lost nearly $9 million in so-called syndicated mortgage investments. They say they were told the investments were safe and secure. That story, which began with a tip to a CBC News reporter, shows just how easily people can fall victim to complex and enticing financial offers.
At a meeting in Richmond Hill last month, syndicated mortgage investors were struggling to piece together what had happened to their money.
A syndicated mortgage is when someone gets a number of people together to pool their money to buy a property instead of getting a mortgage from the bank. It's legal, but can also be used to carry out fraud. In this case, the investors were approached by a mortgage agent, someone they knew and trusted, who promoted strong returns on short-term loans.
It looks like it's a good investment, just investment for 1 year and then you can get some interest, why not?
The agent, Dominic Ha, was acting on behalf of Black Bear Homes, a property developer in Ontario. But unknown to many of the investors, the day-to-day operator of that company, Gary Fraser, had been convicted of fraud back in 2008.
He admitted it up front and said yes, he had been committed. And also, Dominic knew about his histories.
Both Dominic Ha and Black Bear Homes declined interview requests from CBC News. But Gary Fraser did tell us he was doubtful an expert would consider the investments fraud. CBC Toronto reporter Michelle Cheung has been working on this story since she was approached by a member of the Chinese-Canadian community. So, Michelle, as you and I both know, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of journalists in this country. Why did they reach out to you?
It was one investor who said that he really wasn't sure he could trust the Chinese press in the GTA. And so he basically went in search of somebody that he thought he could from his own community, from the Chinese community. And I guess he Googled me and he found me working for CBC. And so he contacted me.
And so the next thing you know, you're working on this story and you're talking to people, and you know, we both had experience with people who've lost money or embarrassed by a decision they make, and how hard it is for them to talk about it publicly.
Well, and that was the thing. It was the amount of work that you don't see is even just convincing people to speak to us. I mean, in the Chinese community is like many Asian communities where there's a sense of shame if something bad happens, and there was a huge reluctance for them to speak to us. In fact, the first investor who contacted me, his family invested more than $700,000 in the Black Bear Homes syndicated mortgages. I mean, they haven't seen a penny of that back in the principal. And so what we proposed was, why don't we can do it in groups, and that way it's not someone who's being singled out, that that there's safety in numbers. They basically said, in fact, at the end of the day, they agreed to do it because they said that they felt like they had learned a really expensive lesson, and they wanted to make sure that people in their community would also then could learn from that.
Right, that it wasn't all just a loss. Something positive comes of this. What's interesting too is that whenever we do a story, we the parlance around here is that we file for all the platforms. We file a story for online, for radio, for TV. Typically for us it's in English, sometimes it's in French, but you guys took this in a different direction, which is really unique.
Well, and in fact, Nicole Brockbank, who was the producer on this with me, we worked very closely together, and we both thought that it would be really important to put this out into Chinese as well, this very story on the web. And the reason we decided to do that was one of the investors who, after we had finished the interview with this one group of investors, she came to me and she said, thanks so much for doing this. I know that, especially because I know that we're not your audience. And I thought, you are our audience. I said, we are your community. If we're not serving you, then there's a problem here. This is the CBC. And so both Nicole and I said, we went to our bosses and said, we should put this out in Chinese so that we reach those people. And in fact, a lot of the investors that we didn't get to speak to, English isn't their first language. In fact, a lot of them don't speak English. And so I thought it was really important that we reach out to them too.
Yeah, it was cool. It was neat to see. Thanks for this.
You're welcome.
People don't realize Canada has been very rough in the United States.
Softwood lumber, the cross-border battle that just won't end, is back in the news. A lesson I learned covering this story in the 1980s, next. First, investigators on assignment.
I'm Margaret Evans in South Sudan. The country finally won its independence from Sudan in 2011, but it was barely 3 years old before it descended into civil war. This is the result. Hundreds of thousands of people displaced, fleeing for their lives into camps like this one. They're called a protection of civilians camp, and hunger is spreading. But how do you prevent a famine if there's no prospect of peace in sight? We'll have those stories coming up on CBC News, radio, television, and online.
We're curious to know what you want to know about the work that we do, and so we always invite people to ask us a question about investigative journalism. This week we got one from Rod. He asked, how do you decide when there's enough information to go with a story? Well, in investigative journalism, you have a bit of a luxury, actually. You're often working on a story that isn't in the headlines. Nobody knows about it. They don't even know you're working on it. So you can take the time and make sure that you're comfortable that the information you publish is true and you can stand by it. When a story is in the headlines and everyone's covering it,
there's no denying there's a sense of competition, but there's also no upside to publishing something you're not sure about and getting it wrong. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, even with breaking stories, to make sure that what we say, what we put online on radio and television, is right. It doesn't mean we never make mistakes, we do, but we're always trying to make sure that what we tell you is something we have checked many times. Hope that answers your question.
Canada's softwood lumber industry gets hit with hefty tariffs by the Trump administration.
Canada is now on the president's hit list as well, and believe it or not, it's all about timber.
So the softwood lumber dispute is back in the headlines. It's the fourth time in recent history the U.S. has decided Canada isn't playing by the rules. Now, Canada has won the fight each time, but if you're tired of hearing about it, and we know that lumber producers are, I don't like hearing about it for an entirely different reason.
The CKPG 5 o'clock news with Diana Swain.
Good afternoon. Back in the mid-1980s, when this was first an issue, I was a very green reporter working in northern BC, ground zero for the softwood lumber battle. I know, I don't know which was bigger, the hair or the shoulder pads. But back then, the point person for softwood lumber and NAFTA in Canada was International Trade Minister Pat Carney, who went on to become a senator.
We will want to maintain our sovereignty over our right to manage our forests.
She was one of the most high-profile cabinet ministers in the country then, but I was so nervous. On air, I called her Prime Minister Pat Carney. She might have enjoyed the momentary promotion, but my boss looked at me like I might as well just pack up my stapler and go. It's been 30 years since that moment, and I still cringe thinking about it. So if you're tired of hearing about softwood lumber, me too. Let's hope this battle is settled soon. And on behalf of everyone who works on this program, thanks to CKPG for hanging on to that tape all these years. I'm Diana Swain. We are The Investigators.